Hi, everyone, and welcome to English Digest. My name is Joe.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
Now, today we're on our history unit, and we're going to be having a look at American history, and it says the pamphlets that changed history. Now, a lot of history is influenced by the writings of influential people who have ideas. They commit those ideas to paper, and then people with political power might read them and decide, hey, you know what? I like these ideas. We need to make some changes to how we run things, how we do things.
Yeah.
And one of the particular pamphlets that we're going to be taking a look at today had a huge impact on American history and actually the formation of the United States as we know it today.
That's right. America started out as a colony of Great Britain. We were not independent. And then I guess some people decided, hey, we want some independence and we want to get rid of Great Britain from telling us what to do and taxing us. We all hate taxes. So they had a little revolution. So we're going to talk about how some of these pamphlets that were written with really interesting ideas about liberty changed the course of some countries, okay? So right now, guys, we're going to get started by having Joe read through day one, and then we'll be back to discuss some of these words and terms.
There have been many important documents that have drastically changed the course of history. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, was one such example. Paine was one of the founding fathers of the U.S. He emigrated from Britain to its North American colonies just in time to participate in the U.S. War of Independence. Originally, colonists were only calling for freedom from unfair British taxation. Not until Paine published Common Sense in 1776 did Americans start fighting for complete independence from the British Crown. After its publication, Common Sense became an instant success and ended up selling around 500,000 copies during the course of the war. Such was its popularity that even those who didn't own a copy of it often heard it read aloud at taverns and during events. Throughout the pamphlet, Paine advocated American independence. He wrote that the monarchy in Britain had been granted way too much power. In fact, he argued that the idea of monarchy itself was questionable in the first place. As he believed all men are created equal, Paine also contended that Britain had only protected America out of its own economic interests, and that if America was to be taken seriously by other countries, it needed to become independent. All of these points were written in a straightforward style that could be easily read and understood. As a result, Common Sense successfully rallied public opinion and mobilized massive support for the revolution. Moreover, in terms of the thoughts pioneered in Common Sense, it is considered the precursor of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. John Adams, the second president of the U.S., thus wrote about Paine's contribution to the U.S. War of Independence. Without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain.
Okay, guys, let's take a look at this particular article. Of course, our unit is on history, so we're going to be looking at some history of not only the United States, but in day two, we're going to take a look at France. So the title of our article is The Pamphlets That Changed History. What's a pamphlet? First of all, it's not easy to say. We understand that. It's got the f-l together. Pamphlet. Just practice it slowly. Pam. And then flet, pamphlet. A pamphlet is just a small booklet or a leaflet. Sometimes we'll refer to them as leaflet. It looks like a tiny, tiny book. There aren't very many pages, and we usually get pamphlets about one subject. For example, if I'm on the sidewalk, sometimes people will hand me not just flyers, which is a single sheet of paper, but a pamphlet if they're trying to maybe sell some homes or sell some apartments. They want me to look at all the beautiful rooms in the apartments and, that'll sometimes be a pamphlet. But this pamphlet was written long ago, and it actually changed the history of the United States.
Now, our article begins by saying there have been many important documents that have drastically changed the course of history. A document is anything that is written down on a piece of paper, or it could be, of course, typed out, anything like that. A document is something official, it's written down, and it's usually quite important as well. It doesn't have to be literature. It can be something that you need in order to achieve do something official, like with the government. You need a lot of documents to apply for a passport, or a passport itself is a document. It's a travel document that you use to move between countries.
Well, I would even call these sheets of paper that have our article on them documents.
These are documents too. We have documents everywhere in modern life. These documents have drastically changed the course of history. Drastically here just means they've done something in a very dramatic or profound way. They've had a big impact, in other words. To drastically change something means to make big changes in something. So for the United States, well, as we're going to learn, they were a colony, and perhaps they might have remained as such if it weren't for this document. So, of course, it was a drastic change because the United States became a very powerful country, and perhaps that is at least in part due to this document.
Yeah, I think if they'd stayed a colony, the world would be very different, wouldn't it? The next paragraph starts with Paine, Thomas Paine, was one of the founding fathers of the U.S. If you found something, guys, it doesn't mean you find something that's lost. This is not the past tense of the verb to find. To found something means to organize or set up something new, and typically it's an organization. Here we're talking about they set up or established a new country. The founding fathers were a group of men who really had a lot of input into what the United States was going to become.
Now it says he, Paine, emigrated from Britain to its North American colonies just in time to participate in the U.S. War of Independence. If we're talking about moving from one place to another, we say we emigrate from a place. We would say we immigrate to a place. So we'd say we emigrate from Britain, immigrate, that's I-M-M, to North America. So he emigrated from Britain, he left Britain, and went to the North American colonies. A colony is a place that is far away from the quote-unquote mother country, but still controlled by that country. So these colonies were in North America, but they were controlled, of course, by the rulers, or the ruler, I should say, in England.
The king.
The king.
King George.
Or at that time it was King George. And he had all these colonies all over the world. At this point in history, there were a lot of very powerful countries, England and France and European powers, Spain. They had colonies all over the world, throughout Africa, North America, South America, all the way over to Australia, Asia. All over the world, they basically divided it up into these different colonies, places that were overseas that they controlled. So, at that time, Paine was traveling to the colonies. He was just in time to participate in, or to take part in, the U.S. War of Independence. So he showed up and he said, "Hey, wait, it's not over yet. Am I too late? No? Okay, let's get fighting. Let's get doing this War of Independence thing." War of Independence just means the United States was saying, well, we don't want to be a colony anymore. We want to be our own thing. And
we want to be our own bosses.
We want to be our own boss. We don't want to work for you anymore, George.
Yeah.
We want to do our own thing. So next we're going to learn a little bit more about this War of Independence and why it was happening.
So originally, the colonists, those are the people who lived in North America, they were only calling for freedom from unfair British taxation. They actually weren't asking to be liberated from Great Britain. They just wanted to have a say or have some input into how they were taxed. They didn't think it was fair that the the king could ask for some of their money without letting them decide on how they wanted their country to be run. They had no say or no voice in any of what happened as far as the leadership there. Taxation refers to the taxes that all citizens pay to their government to keep the government running. The government's primary job is to keep citizens safe. Of course, it's expanded since then, but that's what it was originally for. And you're taxed based usually on the income you make. So if you make $100,000, they may tax you 10%, just as an example of that. So they really weren't asking to have liberty or be free from England. They just wanted to have a voice. If you call for something, you say something publicly, should be done. This should happen. We think this is the right thing to do. So they were calling, they were just wanting to have a voice in what was happening with the taxation.
Yeah, they weren't happy about taxes,
No.
and that was because everything they got there was very highly taxed.
Yes.
If they got salt, or if they got tea, or if they got any sort of good there, the king took his share of that. He took money off the top, so
Yes.
they were not happy about that. Not until Paine published Common Sense in 1776 did Americans start fighting for complete independence from the British crown. So we see a phrase here, not until. So before this did not happen, in other words. They did not want or were not fighting for complete independence, but he published this pamphlet, Common Sense, and then the ideas there inspired people. And they thought, well, why don't we just get complete independence from the British crown? A crown is something that a king or a queen wears on their head. It's a symbol of their authority or of their power. Anybody who wears a crown, a real crown, I should say, not somebody on Halloween wearing a tiara or something like that.
Right.
If it's a king or a queen, like Queen Elizabeth, she wears a crown. That means she is of royalty and she is the ruler of a country.
Now, after its publication, Common Sense became an instant success and ended up selling around 500,000 copies during the course of the war. The course of the war just means while the war was happening or taking place. When you publish something, what you end up with is some sort of publication. So a publication can be a book, a novel, a magazine, a newspaper, anything that's printed. So we know now that it was printed and then sold. It didn't cost very much money, but it was sold to people who wanted to get a look at what was being said in Common Sense. And it became very popular. People really agreed with what Thomas Paine said inside this pamphlet. Such was its popularity that even those who didn't own a copy of it often heard it read aloud at taverns and during events. Back then, they didn't have smartphones and they couldn't be on social media.
No TV.
No TV. So they would go to taverns, which is a bar with a couple of rooms where you could stay overnight if you needed to. And they would listen to people actually reading Common Sense out loud to each other. That was considered entertainment. And a lot of people really started getting behind what it said, which means they supported what Thomas Paine was saying.
That's right. So the word was spreading not only by people reading it, but by it being read aloud at public gatherings as well. So people were really starting to get on board with the ideas in Common Sense. We're going to learn more about the influence of this pamphlet and how it impacted the United States. Right now, though, let's take a short break to listen to our Chinese teacher.
大家好，欢迎收听 English Digest， 我是 Alice。今天我们要阅读的是 Unit 11 The Pamphlets That Changed History 的第一篇文章。走在路上，我们有时候会收到一些小册子，通常我们看一下内容就丢掉了。但你知道有些小册子竟然能够改变历史吗？美国的开国者之一 Thomas Paine 所写的 Common Sense 就是促成美国独立运动的小册子。我们看到文章的第二段第二句 He emigrated from Britain to its North American colonies just in time to participate in the U.S. War of Independence. 他从英国移居到他的北美洲殖民地时，正好赶上参加美国独立战争。这句里有一个名词 independence 是独立的意思。 它的形容词是 independent independent 独立的。如果要表示不依靠某人，我们可以说 be independent of somebody。例如 Bill was financially independent of his parents by the time he was 20。 比尔到了20岁时已经不在金钱上依靠他的父母。而 independent 的相反词是 dependent D-E-P-E-N-D-E-N-T Be dependent on somebody 就是依赖依靠某人的意思。例如 After graduation, Kevin was still dependent on his parents for his living. 凯文毕业以后仍然靠父母生活。接着我们看到第二段的最后一句 Not until Paine published Common Sense in 1776 did Americans start fighting for complete independence from the British Crown. 直到潘恩在西元1776年出版了《常识》，美国人才开始为了完全独立于英国王国政府而战。Not ... until ... 是直到什么什么才怎么样的意思。例如 I did not go to bed until I finished this report. 我直到完成报告才去睡觉。Not ... until ... 也可以用于倒装句型，将 not 和 until 后面所接的名词或子句一起移到句首，然后主要子句用 be 动词或助动词来和主词倒装。而且 not until 也可以替换成 only when。例如刚刚那句我们可以倒装成 Not until I finished the report did I go to bed， 或是 Only when I finished the report did I go to bed。 而这个句型也可以搭配强调句型，变成 It is not until ... that 怎么样。所以刚刚的句子我们也可以替换成 It was not until I finished the report that I went to bed。文章的第三段提到 Thomas Paine 的 Common Sense 被大家广泛的阅读，而小册子里面的一些内容说明为何美国应该摆脱英国的殖民，也因此促成了美国独立战争。我们看到第三段的第二句 Such was its popularity that even those who didn't own the copy of it often heard it read aloud at taverns and during events。 它是如此的受欢迎，以至于即便那些没有这本书的人也常常在酒馆及活动中听到它被大声朗读。本句的 such 怎么样 that 怎么样是如此什么什么以至于什么什么的意思，而本句使用了 such 的倒装句型。原来的句子是 Its popularity was such that blah blah blah。 此句型也可以用 so ... that ... 来替换，变成 It was so popular that blah blah blah。 也可变换成倒装句型 So popular was it that blah blah blah。 我们再举一个例子来说明。原来的句子是 Andy was so angry that he shouted at me。 安迪如此生气以至于他对我大叫。倒装后会变成 So angry was Andy that he shouted at me。 用 such 替换后会变成 Andy's anger was such that he shouted at me。 那这句倒装后我们就会说 Such was Andy's anger that he shouted at me。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back. We're on the second half of our lesson today, the pamphlets that changed history, day 1. We've been talking about an important document that really changed the course of history, not just in America, but around the world. And it was Thomas Paine's pamphlet, a little short booklet called Common Sense that he published. Thomas Paine was one of the founding fathers of the U.S., along with Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, some of these famous names that you're familiar with. Some of you probably have never heard of Thomas Paine. I'm not surprised. He doesn't get a lot of publicity anymore, but he was one of the founding fathers. He originally was British. He emigrated or moved from Great Britain to North America, where there were some colonies set up by the British. He got there just in time to participate in the U.S. War of Independence, or the Independence War. The Revolutionary War is what we really call it in America. And originally, the colonists were just upset or complaining or protesting the taxes that they had to pay on everything they bought that was shipped over from Great Britain. They thought that was unfair. And then it led to actually them saying, oh, forget the taxes. We don't want England to have any part of us anymore. We want to be independent. And so a lot of people really got behind what Thomas Paine said in Common Sense and started fighting for complete independence.
Let's learn more about the pamphlet now and the ideas that it had within it. It goes on to say here in the second half that throughout the pamphlet, Paine advocated American independence. If you advocate something, it means you're in favor of something. You're saying, yes, this is a good idea. This is smart. This is wise. This is something that should be done. So he was advocating American independence means he was in favor of American independence. He thought that America should be separate from England entirely. It should be its own country. He wrote that the monarchy in Britain had been granted way too much power. The monarchy is the royal family in Britain. The king and the queen and the princes and the princesses, all those people, they still have monarchy in England today, although they have far less power than they did back then. They still have power today, but they are not really like the rulers of the colonies or of the country or anything like that these days. Of course, they have a prime minister who makes all the decisions. Back then, though, the monarchy was it. The monarchy of Britain, they were the power. And Paine was saying they had been granted. If you're granted something, it means you are given something. They had been given way too much power.
Right.
And so people in the colonies, they said, yeah, you're right. They do have too much power over our lives. We've got to do something about that.
Well, in fact, he argued that the idea of monarchy itself was questionable in the first place. He was saying that they had not only been given too much power, they really shouldn't even have any authority at all. If something's questionable, you're saying that it's open for debate. We can argue about it because it doesn't necessarily have to be right. A lot of people just were born into that system and thought, we'll accept it. It's always been this way. And he was saying, well, why? Let's talk about this. Let's debate it. So this idea of monarchy or having a king or queen control country was questionable in the first place. He didn't even think it should be there. If something's wrong in the first place, it means you're arguing about a secondary issue, but really you shouldn't even be talking about it at all, right? What's a good example for in the first place?
It just means that something was wrong from the beginning. Like you're saying if you say you snuck out of your house or something at night, you went to a party, and then you got in trouble, your parents would say, you shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah, you should never. It's not even that they went to the party. The first thing they did wrong was sneak out of the house.
Yes, so it's saying something was wrong from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It was never a good idea.
No.
Now, Paine also contended that Britain had only protected America out of its own economic interests, and that if America was to be taken seriously by other countries, it needed to become independent. If you are contending something, it means you're making a point. You're making a very strong point and doing it in a very serious manner, and you are backing up your point with facts. So he's contending this. He's saying, yes, this is the way it should be. He was saying Britain only protected America out of its own economic interests, which I'm sure is at least partly true.
Sure.
Or maybe even wholly true, because Britain had all these colonies because they could make money there. There was lots of things that they could sell there.
There are a lot of resources.
There was resources.
Right?
There was land. There was crops. There was timber. There was all kinds of things that they could take from the land and that they could sell to make money. That's why they had colonies. They weren't going over there just for fun. They were going there to make money. So he said if America was to be taken seriously by other countries, it needed to become independent. He was saying, well, all these other countries, they're laughing at us. We're getting taken advantage of.
That's right.
We're being made to look like fools, so we have to do something about this.
Yeah, we have to stand up for ourselves. So all of these points or these facts or these arguments that he had come up with were written in a straightforward style that could be easily written and understood. It means the way he wrote, everybody could understand. You didn't need to have a master's degree to understand what he was trying to say. It was very commonplace speech that he's making, so everyone could understand it. And you didn't have to be the smartest person. Sometimes I read things and I think, who can understand this? This is crazy. But if you write in a straightforward style, it's easily understood. Now, as a result, common sense successfully rallied public opinion. If you rally public opinion, it means you get people behind you who support you, and you get them in a group, so you have a lot of power. Today, we see people who will get together and protest publicly, or they'll march. They'll march and they'll get people to notice that they have something to say. If you mobilize something, you get it moving, guys. Mobile means to move. So he mobilized massive support for the revolution. The revolution, of course, is when a group of people get together and try to overthrow a government or some sort of system that they're not in support of. Here, of course, we were overthrowing King George and the British system, the British crown.
Moreover, in terms of the thoughts pioneered in common sense, it is considered the precursor of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. In terms of just means we're framing things a little bit differently now. We're taking the context and changing it a little bit, or the main subject, in other words. So we're talking about the thoughts pioneered. Pioneer just means to bring about something new, some sort of new idea or system. So the ideas pioneered in common sense, it is considered the precursor of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. A precursor is something that comes before something else. So we say that common sense kind of led to the U.S. Declaration of Independence, or at least some of the ideas were transferred. And the U.S. Declaration of Independence was the document that said the United States of America is a country, and it is no longer subject to the British crown.
Now, John Adams, who was the second president of the U.S., he actually wrote about Paine's contributions, and he gave him a lot of credit for the U.S. gaining its independence. He talked about Paine's contributions. When you contribute to something, you donate your time or your money, you have played some sort of part in something. And of course, his contributions were quite important. John Adams actually said, and this is a quote, "Without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain." To do something in vain means you do something and it's a wasted effort because you don't have any success. There's no positive result. So, thanks to Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the War for Independence went on, and they actually were successful, as you know. Right now, guys, we're out of time. We got to listen to our Chinese teacher.
文章的最后一段提到 Thomas Paine 的 Common Sense 之所以会如此受欢迎，是因为他的文字很简单易懂，因此很容易获得读者的共鸣和认同。我们看到课文的最后一句 Without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain. 没有尝试作者的这支笔，华盛顿所举起的剑将徒劳无功。本句的 without 是假设语气的用法，相当于 but for， 意思是若不是怎么怎么样，或是若没有什么什么。without 后面接一个名词，然后逗点接一个完整句子。若要表示与现在事实相反，句子使用过去助动词加原形动词。例如 Without or but for the internet, we wouldn't access information so quickly. 如果没有网络，我们无法如此迅速地取得资讯。若要表示与过去事实相反，句子则使用过去助动词加 have 加 VPP。例如Without or but for your advice, I might have failed the exam last week. 若没有你的建议，上礼拜的考试我可能不及格。以上就是今天的课程，谢谢收听。
That's all the time we have for English Digest today. We'll be back again tomorrow with another pamphlet that changed history in another part of the world. Until then, for English Digest, I'm Joe.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.